In April 2002, the Israeli army surrounded Jenin refugee camp and subjected it to a 2-week siege. The fighters held out for almost 2 weeks before the camp was occupied. By the time the Israeli army withdrew from the camp, over 60 Palestinian men, women and children had been killed, thousands of men rounded up and detained, and over 400 homes demolished. In the aftermath of the massacre, I worked with a group of volunteers from the camp, digging bodies out of the rubble of demolished homes. We ended up digging with shovels and sometimes our bare hands, unearthing the charred remains of bodies. It was devastating for everyone who witnessed it, and the memories of it continue to haunt me. My name is Quiva. I lived in Jenin refugee camp for the year of 2002. In this year I was to witness not only the brutality of the occupation, but also the resilience, hospitality and humanity of a people who refused to be broken. My own engagement with this struggle was deepened from an ideological one to a far more painful one, that of love and respect for a refugee camp that became home. In the absence of international censure of Israeli policies, thousands of activists have travelled to the West Bank and Gaza Strip. We attempt to break the isolation that Palestinians feel by representing, in a very small but potent way, an alternative face of the West, one of humanity and solidarity. We come to occupied Palestine to independently witness the realities of the occupation and to challenge the silence surrounding them. Jenin refugee camp, Włochami Mussolinigo, the camp of endurance, has become a symbol of resistance across the Middle East. In the aftermath of the massacre, people tried to reclaim some stability in their lives, but there was no respite. The Israeli military returned with an aggression and recklessness born out of a heightened sense of impunity. The curfews, assassinations and casual killings continued.
وين إصابتها دكتور؟
تصاب في العضد الأيمن الأيسر، بالإضافة إلى رصاصة هي موجودة في منطقة أعلى الصدر من جهة القلب.
I grappled with how to respond. I decided to use my physical presence to try to minimize some of the brutality. The ability of activists to do this is possible only because of inherent racism. Our blood as foreigners is deemed less expendable than that of Palestinians, and we are less likely to get shot engaging in interventionist actions. It was an uncomfortable dynamic to work with, but I used it to intervene and negotiate with Israeli soldiers and to be present as a witness during invasions. When viewed from a comfortable context in the West, footage of activists standing in front of tanks can seem crazy and possibly suicidal, but it's a natural reaction to an unnatural situation. When you're surrounded by violence, it's a very human reaction to try to struggle for people to be allowed basic human rights. It's the only response, ultimately, that allowed me to retain my own humanity too.
وكانت يعني شغلات كثير تصير تتدخل بيها، يعني يجي الجيش بده يطخ بده يضرب يقيم يحط، هي تعرض حالها للخطر واحنا ننصحها كلها. يعني انا اكثر مره قلت لها الاجنبيه هاي اللي في غزه انه صار معاها هيك، هي تقول لي لا انا بالنسبه لي عادي، فيش حدا احسن من حدا، وانتوا انتوا بني ادمين زينا زيكم، يعني ما فيش فرق بين فلسطيني وفرق بين اجنبي ومسلم ومسيحي. وكانت تقوم بشغلات كثير يعني بشكرها عليه كثير يعني فيش حدا كان يعمل زي ما هي بتسوي، مثلا تعرض حالها للخطر اكثر من مره، يعني يمر كل الجيش بدهم يطخوا علينا وتكافلهم يعني بوجههم تحكي لهم ناس تشتري خبز بدها تقيم بدها تحط، يعني نسوان اطفال صغار بدهم يمركوا بدهم يقيموا يحطوا، هي توقف قدامهم وتمنعهم. يعني مره مركت طفل صغير يعني طلع على دبابه لحق الدبابه، فهي وقع على الارض، فهي مسكته واخذته على جنب وكانت ما تخافش من اي شيء يعني، وانا بحترمها بشرفي يعني.
One has a responsibility, to stand by, not necessarily to stand up, not to be removed from the people, that you're trying to protect or trying to minimize the brutality that they suffer on a day-to-day basis in any way that you can, but to stand with them, to coexist, to live, to breathe, to exult in their strength, and to try and comfort them in the times, like the times that we're all living through now, in which people are suffering a level of pain, that most human beings, I think, would break underneath. If you watch any situation like that tank moving up the hill, you see immediately those children knew how to duck, they know how to get down, and this is what is keeping them alive, the self-preservation instinct. Even when the tanks aren't here, it's the uncertainty of when they'll come back into town, it's the uncertainty of, should you let your child go to school, because you don't know if he or she will come back home again alive. It's the uncertainty every time you say goodbye to somebody in the morning of whether they're going to come back to you walking or come back to you in an ambulance or come back to you dead.
Foot.
The tanks are coming. Sit down.
Palestinian school children are under continual siege. Over the past 4 years, over 2,800 school children have been wounded on their journeys to and from school. 5 children have been killed in their classrooms by Israeli gunfire.
شو اسمك انتي؟ شو اسمك؟ شو اسمك؟ دانا. دانا.
We want the freedom, we want the life. I want my children go to the school free and back to the house free. But you see, everything in here dangerous. Everything in here dangerous.
Ali Samoudi is a local journalist and father of 3. He has been seriously wounded twice while trying to document the daily human rights violations committed by Israeli soldiers. Ali challenges the occupation with his camera, deconstructing myths with the power and truth of his images.
She is back.
I walk children to and from school to try to keep them a little bit safer. Gaining an education in occupied Palestine is an act of resistance in itself. My time here, a very small proportion of it involved direct action and getting in between when Israeli soldiers entered into Jenin. A far greater part, and I regard this as much a direct action, was the sitting and the listening and the trying to assume some of the pain and the burden of people who are living around me.
Assalamu alaikum.
I say they're happy because there's no school. They can't get anywhere else in the world. Her father was good. In these months of living in the camp, of sitting with people and hearing their stories, I began to understand why there is such a deliberate policy of excluding their narratives in the mainstream media. The criminalization and dehumanization of Palestinians relies on our ignorance. Reaching across the divides of misinformation and forming our own relationships with Palestinians is itself a threat to the occupation.